Thank you very much. It's a delight to be here this morning to see so many faces I haven't seen in a while. I appreciate you coming out. And I appreciate the work of the foundation because it has put some intellectual might and some seriousness behind some of these ideas that for years have been just called right-wing kook ideas. Now they're right-wing thoughtful ideas, but they're good ideas, and it's going to bring some credibility to some of these arguments in the Georgia House and Senate too. In 1824, the Farmer's Almanac said this about Congress. Congress talks too much and spends too much. They haven't found it necessary to make another utterance since, and nothing much has changed. Today, Clinton is talking more about spending more and taxing more, and it is awesome. But what Clinton is not doing is leveling with the American people. On the night of February 17th, just after he spoke to the House and the Senate, I was asked by Bill Nigut what I thought about the speech, and I said, the whole program was built on a lie. Clinton said, you recall, he had to raise taxes because he suddenly was astonished to find out in December that this budget deficit was going to be $350 billion. And that isn't true, because he was interviewed on July 6th of last year in Business Week, where he said he just discovered the budget deficit was going to be $350 to $400 billion. He was informed by the Budget Committee, whose chairman is now the head of his OMB, what the budget deficit was in August. So if you take a program that's built on a lie, you begin to question its merits to start with. I went on to tell Bill Nigut that it is hard to take someone seriously who plays so fast and loose and recklessly with the facts. Last week, on 3 occasions, Bill Clinton said, I will not raise taxes until we have spending cuts in place first. I'm sure you heard him at least once. And yet the program that we're going to vote on next week has taxes in it that begin retroactive to January 1st, 1993. And there are no net spending cuts in the first 2 years. 0. There are some small cuts, but there are more additions that more than make up for them. So while you'll hear him this weekend. You'll hear his people on TV this weekend on the news shows say spending cuts first. His own program belies the fact. There are no net spending cuts in the first 2 years. There are promised cuts in the last 3 years. But the automatic sequester that would automatically cut across the board dissolves after the first 2 years. It's no longer there. So it's even problematical whether we'll get cuts after the first 2 years. The tax portion of this program is absolutely breathtaking. I won't read it all to you. I had my legislative director yesterday go through the program and pick out the revenue raisers, also known as taxes. There are 43 of them. 43 of them, a new bracket. The 10% millionaires tax goes in at $250,000 in income, which creates a bracket of about 39.5%. The increase in the alternative minimum tax, reinstate the top estate tax and gift tax rates, reduce the deductible portion of business meals and entertainment, deny deduction for club dues, deny deduction for executives pay over $1 million. This is the first time that I know of in the history of this country that the Congress is going to decide what shareholders have a right to pay their executives. And it's going to have an impact on that because it will not make anything over that deductible. They're going to eliminate the deduction for lobbying costs. Most of the lobbyists I see in my office, almost all of them, are from here, from the 4th District. And they work for Georgia Power, Southern Company, Wachovia. And they are hired to pay full-time attention to read the 60,000 pages of regulations in the Federal Register to keep their companies out of trouble. And it seems that that's just as important a service to their company as advertising. But because Clinton has managed to put a distasteful twist on the word lobbyist, they're not going to allow them to deduct the cost of doing that. The 43 revenue raisers will just take your breath away. It reminds me of a story of George McGovern, who was in the Senate, and someone was speaking, and the person said, please, gentlemen, be quiet. I want to tax your memories. And McGovern said, God, I wish I'd have thought of that one. And coming behind it This $250 billion in tax increases over 5 years is $50 billion a year, roughly, in new taxes. Coming behind that is a health care program that we now hear is going to cost $150 billion a year in new taxes. That's 3 times as much as this program. And the head of the Congressional Budget Office testified before the Ways and Means Committee a month or so ago and was asked, is this the end? Is this going to solve it? And he said, no, we'll be back in 3 or 4 years with another program of taxes at least this big and perhaps twice as big. And you know, sooner or later you get to the point you say, why don't you just take it all? Our country cannot stand this hit. Our economy cannot stand this hit. But we're told that we must raise revenues and get more money from the wealthy, because those are the folks who benefited so much during the decade of greed. You remember that decade. But weren't they here just 2.5 years ago when we did this? The 1990 budget agreement was to get the wealthy to pay their fair share. The luxury tax. The luxury tax cost 25,000 jobs in the yachting industry and brought in less money in revenues than were brought in from those taxes in the previous year. People who are wealthy are usually wealthy because they're smart and they change their behavior. Every economist I've talked to has said that I believe these tax increases are going to bring in less revenue than last year because people are going to change their habits. I said to Bill Bennett one day, how can they call this new? Didn't they see what happened just 2.5 years ago? And Bill Bennett said, for people who never watch or read history, everything is new. And that's the problem with this administration. Barbara Kennelly, Congresswoman from Connecticut, who is in the leadership of the Democrat side, said in the New York Times on Monday, this tax package out of the Ways and Means Committee is the heart and soul of the Clinton administration. I can't improve on that. The centerpiece of his entire administration is increasing taxes. And on the investment side, that's what we used to call spending. You're going to see increases in spending on social programs. Extended employer-provided educational assistance is going to be permanent. Extend the targeted jobs tax credit permanently. He wants to get credit for a jobs program, and so he's going to put something out there bright and clear in front of you with new monies for it, without without telling you that there are 164 jobs programs already in the federal government. Disconnected, discrete, 164 of them, and he needs one more. We're going to provide some passive loss changes, which are going to help the real estate industry. But for the most part, what you're seeing is a gigantic buildup in government. The largest shift of resources from the private to the public sector in our history. He said originally that he was going to have $3 in cuts for every dollar in new taxes. It comes out to $3 in new taxes for every dollar in cuts. There's a kind of a through a looking glass quality to this conversation in Washington and the way they talk about things. It is this, do you remember what Humpty Dumpty said? When I use a word, it means exactly what I want it to mean. Investment is spending, contribution is taxes, sacrifice is taxes, deficit reduction. Last Sunday on the news shows, every person from the administration, every one of them, said, when they were asked about the tax bill that passed the Ways and Means Committee, said, this is a deficit reduction bill. You've got to look at both sides of it. This is a deficit reduction program. Clinton's own projections, hoping that the new taxes will bring in new revenues and hoping that there will be spending cuts in 5 years, projects a $1 trillion increase in the total debt in 5 years. The lowest he gets the deficit down on a yearly basis is $287 billion. That is 5 years of Reagan's tax deficit increases in 4 years. You remember Reagan, the one that caused all this problem? Reagan had deficits because he cut taxes and increased spending on the military. We're going to have deficits because we're increasing taxes and destroying the military. But it is not uncommon to redefine the language when you're changing directions. They did that in communism and socialism. But it is curious to me to watch across the world as communism and socialism virtually are disappearing, and we keep moving inexorably to the left. Our social spending is going to have welfare. It will be the third largest item in the federal budget in 5 years, exceeding the defense. We will have socialized medicine. Our professional military will be a trained militia. We're going to eliminate SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative, which was really what caused the Soviets to give up, something they couldn't keep up with. But the tilt in this administration can best be seen in the appointments made at the assistant secretary level particularly. That's where the work gets done. That's where the policies are determined. Robert Reich, the labor secretary, has said that there is too much compromising between labor and management, which is what I thought they were supposed to do when they got into negotiations. But he said there's entirely too much compromising between labor and management, so he's going to gather a group of academics to rewrite the labor laws. And he said you can touch everything except striker replacement. We are going to have striker replacement. Ms. Tyson, the chairwoman of the Council on Economic Advisors, his principal economic advisor, has written as recently as 1991 that the level of taxation has no bearing on economic activity. She's written as recently as 1988 that we could take some important lessons from the economy of Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia. She wrote last year that the feeding frenzy of the marketplace in the last decade should prove to us that firms should be owned by collective groups of workers. His Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for Economic Policy, Alicia Manel, has urged Clinton, and is still urging Clinton, that he must confiscate 15% of all the retirement funds in America because they've been built up untaxed, and that's unfair to the poor and an advantage to the rich. She thinks he should confiscate 15% of all the retirement funds and then tax them thereafter. If you believe, as I do, that one of the principal problems in our economy is the lack of ability to formulate capital, to create capital, giving the government 15% of what we do have seems like a mistake. His soon-to-be, I expect she'll be approved, Assistant Secretary of HUD for Fair Housing, Roberta Ochsenberg, believes that homosexuals ought to be a protected class in the Fair Housing Law. His recently appointed Lanny Guinier, Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, has written that our nation should be governed by proportional interest representation by self-appointed communities of interest. When it was pointed out to her that that would mean blacks having 12% of the population would be very underrepresented in terms of Congress, she said, that's my second point is that the minorities ought to be able to veto rules passed by the majority. This is the twist of this administration, and it brings me to conclude that it seems as though it's taken 20 years to count the votes from the 1972 election, but they all came in, and McGovern won. Thank you. I've got some time to take some questions if you want to. Do you want to take some questions?
Is there any hope?
Is there any hope?
Is there any hope for us?
Yeah, it's beginning to, the wheels are not off the cart yet, but they're getting real wobbly. The senators last night got together with Boren and Danforth, and according to this morning's paper, it appears that the Senate is not going to go along with all the tax increases. It's going to insist on some spending cuts. They will pass that in the Senate. It'll come back to the House will pass this program. They're very disciplined on the Democrat side of the aisle. When it comes back to the House, he will begin to have problems with his left because they want more taxes and less spending cuts. And he is kind of in a box. I've said for some time that I could see this guy because he's not, has no moorings, no values, no philosophy, no principles. I could see him turning 180 degrees tomorrow and just spinning around and saying that this isn't working, let's do it the other way. The problem is he's boxed in by his left. The leadership, and particularly the Black Caucus in the House, is not going to let him spin the other way. So he's kind of in a pinch. And I think to the extent that he gets wounded in the Senate, as he did with the spending package, he's losing the support of the conservative Democrats in the House, of whom there are about 50 or 60. So the hope is that the Senate roughs him up a little bit more, and it gets back to the House, and he loses the Democrat conservatives in the House because they're going to find it easier to vote against him the more wounded he becomes. When he's strong and popular, they're going to have to stick with him. But his approval rating is down to 45%. His disapproval rating is up to 44%. And it's going to be easy for them to vote against him. The hope is that they will start voting against him. Sir?
What do you think the Senate will change other than the energy tax?
I don't know, but I think they're going to have problems with the Social Security tax. The increase in Social Security tax on the benefits of Social Security recipients is going to bring in about $32 billion. That's a pretty big hit for the senior citizen group. As you know, the threshold for determining whether they pay the up to 85% of your earnings, the threshold is going to be determined at $25,000 level in earnings for a single person and 32 for a couple. To determine the threshold, to find yourself at the threshold, they're going to include in that half your Social Security earnings. And for the first time in history, they're going to include any income you have from tax-free bonds. So if somebody has some tax-free bonds set aside that they don't have to pay tax on, it's going to be included in their income for the purposes of determining the threshold. When Clinton brought the Social Security tax to us, he treated it not as a tax increase, but as a spending cut. And when we said, how can you call this tax increase a spending cut? He said, well, it's going to be net less outgo from the Social Security Trust Fund, therefore it's a cut in Social Security expenses. However, that wasn't even the truth, because they're going to take the tax generated, the $32 billion generated from the Social Security recipients, and move it into the general fund now to cover some spending programs. And that's the first time ever we've taken money out of the Social Security Trust Fund and put it in the general fund without accounting for it.
Those of us that watch C-SPAN are familiar with Bob Walker and certainly knew. There's a new face with John Kasich from Ohio. Can you tell us a little
It's
bit
Kasich. It's K-A-S-I-C-I-S-H is Kasich. Kasich's 40 years old. He's a pit bull. He was really the second ranking person on the budget committee. Alex McMillan from North Carolina outranked him, but we made Kasich in the committee on committees on which I serve, we made Kasich the ranking member. We have a band of hardcore conservatives on that committee on committees that have decided to change the Republican side of the aisle. John was urged by Newt early on to build our own budget. There was some risk in that, and I was ambivalent. I was on both sides of the aisle. The argument was that this is exactly what Clinton wanted. This is exactly what Carville had going in New Jersey when he advised Florio, when Florio created the largest tax increase in their history. The Republicans came out with a responsible alternative, and Florio was able to point to their cuts and turn the discussion over not to his budget, but to the Republican budget and bash it. And we had a lot of folks who were very, very skeptical about getting out with specifics when even Bill Clinton wasn't specific. Even today, he's got $72 billion in defense cuts that Sam Nunn does not know where they're coming from. He's got $63 billion in unspecified cuts in the out years. It's right in the words that way. He's got $10 billion in unspecified administrative savings, or $11 billion. So we got out with an 84-page specific deal. Newt Gingrich spent about 7 weeks prodding that through the Republican conference, very quietly. But it was really his victory as much as John's. John's a very bright guy. We went pretty well nationally on news shows. John was on McLaughlin and One and One. He was interviewed by George Will and David Broder, and Newt found all kinds of outlets for him. What it turned out was we got $25 billion more in savings over 5 years than Clinton did, and we did it without any tax increases. And the good fortune was that Clinton had a difficult time starting to attack it because it was responsible and it was well received by the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. They've said over and over Kasich's budget was better than Clinton's budget. So John's a comer. He's being urged very strongly to run for that Metzenbaum Senate seat in Ohio right now, and I hope he does not, because he's very valuable right now in the Budget Committee.
Do you have any predictions on how strong Sam Nunn is going to stay on the case of the military?
How strong Sam Nunn is going to stay on the gays in the military? I think Sam's in a little bit of a box, too. His stock was pretty low after he voted against the Persian Gulf War. He soared in the polls after he stopped the gays in the military thing in January. Trent Lott said 2 Wednesdays ago, I asked him that same question you asked, and Trent told me that Sam has decided that he's not going to be president of the United States and he's going to go back to his roots. And he said, I don't think Sam can let go of the issue of the gays in the military. My guess is the outcome is going to be the line, don't ask and don't tell. Don't let anybody know you're gay in the military, or if you find out you're out, but we won't ask you to and make you lie. Lifting the ban cannot pass Congress, either house. Just simply can't do it. I think it's just foolish of Clinton to. First of all, I brought that up, but it underscores one thing. There is a very serious gay agenda to this administration. Very serious. And number two, letting it fester for 6 months, to me, it just seems crazy. He should have bit that bullet and get it behind him and move on. But
Is ARP getting into this Social Security tax thing?
not yet. Not yet.
From what I can see, it looks like they're standing back.
Well, AARP, it appears to me, was cut a deal some time ago with long-term nursing care and the health care bill if they would lay off the taxes. Although yesterday I got a list of 1,500, I think it was, senior citizens in my district from AARP, and they're beginning to express opposition to the Clinton economic plan. He has deceived and double-crossed so many different constituencies that it's difficult for anyone to take him seriously on any of his commitments. The Bosnian situation was one. It's going to be interesting to see how our allies begin to treat him after he's flip-flopped so many times in just that one issue. They don't know that they can trust anything he says, and I think they're right.
Do you see any relief for small business or S corporations in this new tax situation?
No. S corporations are going to get hit bad. Every business is going to get hit bad. I mean, we passed the 1986 Tax Act, which I still think is immoral, to go back and change depreciation schedules and passive loss provisions after people have made investments, but and destroyed the real estate markets. But what it did is lowered the top rate to 28% and eliminated most of the deductions. And now they're ratcheting up. We'll have a top rate of 39.5%. Add to that, lifting the 2.9% Medicare tax from the ceiling of 50-some thousand to as much as you make. There's another 2.9% on everything above 50-some thousand. It's the most aggressive tax program I've ever seen in my life, and scary one.
Why aren't the Clinton appointments being challenged more vigorously?
That's a good question. Why aren't the Clinton appointments being challenged more vigorously? I think these next few will be. I think the Lanny Guinier appointment is going to be opened up for the world to see, and I think it will let the world see what's at the core of the Clinton administration. Achenberg is being talked about on a good bit on the floor of the Senate. They haven't done the hearings yet. I think she'll pass pretty handily, but Lanny Guinier may actually fail. It really isn't important to me whether they approve her appointment or disapprove of it. What's really important is for the American people to see what she truly believes in this very important policy-making role in the Attorney General's office. I think it could do more than anything you've seen yet to expose what the central core of this administration is. Let me talk just briefly, Bud.
On these floods of letters that are generated by these various propaganda groups, do they have any real impact up there in Congress? Because there's tons of mail coming in all the time.
Yeah, I've actually responded to 22,000 letters so far. There's more mail coming in than anyone's ever seen in the past. Yeah, they make a difference. I don't pay as much attention to the postcard campaigns that are pre-done and people just clip and send. But letters are important. That's how you stay in touch. And you kind of keep, if my mail was coming in 60-40 in favor of the Clinton administration's campaign for his economic program, I'd have to take a hard look at it, and maybe I'd have to resign. Let me say something about health care. That is it's clear that was Hillary's deal now, that the deal she was cut. She can have control of health care. She's got more control over other things, particularly appointments. People yesterday told me that she will probably make the final decision on the next Supreme Court justice. I don't believe they're going to get a health care package passed this year. And if they don't pass one this year, I don't think they can get one passed. It is so complex, involving so many baskets of interest. They're just discovering how complex it really is. They have made the mistake of telling the American people how much they're going to have to pay before they told them what they're going to get for what they paid. They made the second mistake of doing it all behind closed doors. I don't know how you build a broad consensus for any policy change when you do it in secret. The public has been deceived on the economic package, on the spending cuts versus tax increases. They caught on. That's why he started crashing in the polls. They're going to be very suspicious about what they see coming out of this administration with health care. But more importantly, it is a very, very complex issue. They have before the president right now a framework for a national health care. And it's time for us to start using that word socialized medicine again. Because that sets up people, it tells people more precisely what they're doing. But there's a framework before him which are going to require the president to make 1,100 discrete decisions. And John Ehrlichman, who spent a lot of time in the White House, as you probably know, under Nixon, was in my office last Thursday, a week ago yesterday. And he said, you can't put before the president more than 2 or 3 choices within a package, because that means you haven't got it tight enough. And if the president makes more than 3 decisions, it won't pass the Congress, because each decision involves deciding against an interest group, and each decision further involves 2 more down the road. And if they think that they can get this president to make 1,100 decisions and then pass the Congress, they're just nuts. I don't think there will be any health care bill passed. I don't think it'll pass this year, and I don't think it can pass in a election year. And then I think it's very conceivable, and I'm not whistling Dixie here, it's very conceivable that we could have a Republican House after the next election.
Do you see any chance of there being a modified closed rule that would allow some amendments to be offered to the zoning package next week?
No, I don't. I think it'll be a very restricted rule, maybe allow 1 or 2 amendments from the Democrat side. They don't want to start picking away at any of these taxes because none of them can stand on their own. If you put the whole thing in a reconciliation bill, whether you have to vote up or down, they can argue to the conservative Democrats to go back to your districts and say, at least we took charge of the deficit. It was tough to do, but we had to cut the deficit over 5 years. It would come all unraveled if they broke it into pieces. And I suspect that's what the Senate can do, as you know, but I suspect this one will be 1 bill, 1 vote. Lots of debate.
John, I've got the impression then that it probably is the most highest priority to try to elect all Republican representatives in 94.
Yeah, let me put a less partisan cast on that. I have concluded that the most important job I have is electing more Republicans. And that sounds terribly partisan, but I've also learned in 4 months that I don't have much say in anything that goes on around there. The House is corrupt. It is a corrupt place. I'll give you one instance. For years, you've heard people say, I didn't even spend my entire office allowance. I turned back X number of dollars to the Treasury. White Fowler said in his race, wasn't it $1.5 million? Tom, he said, I turned $1.5 million back in. I didn't spend all my money. Last year, excuse me, last year the Gang of 7 discovered where that money went. For years, all that money that was lapsed, but not spent by individual congressional offices, wound up in the Speaker's discretionary fund. He has control of $46 million to do with as he sees fit. That's corrupt. It's structurally unable to make decisions. The Budget Committee makes a decision about the budget in terms of parameters. Then that goes to the authorizing committees, and they'd make decisions within categories. Then it goes back to the appropriators, and they change the authorization language, they change the amounts, they do whatever they want. Then it winds up back in the Budget Committee for budget reconciliation. We have too many committees fooling around with these bills, and it is structurally unable to come to decisions. Just can't be done. Those things can't be changed in this system. The only way they can be changed is if someone else takes over the House and starts fresh. People with idealism. And if we were there for 40 years, we'd be corrupt too. When Tip O'Neill was elected, he wrote in his book, The Man of the House, which was an excellent book. When he was elected Speaker of the Massachusetts House, he was the first Democrat Speaker in 100 years. The Republicans didn't allow Democrats to step into the Speaker's lobby. They changed funds from category to category without votes, after the votes had been taken, after been signed by the governor. He discovered all this. It was time for them to go. The same thing is happening right now at the U.S. House. They've been there too long. It's time for the most important thing I can do is elect more Republicans, at least to get it close enough where we can start making changes along the reform measures that we've introduced.
On the healthcare and alternatives, I understand that Andy Jacob has introduced legislation, or will be introducing legislation to create the MediSaver accounts as an alternative to the Clinton healthcare plan. Have you looked at his proposal or any of the other alternatives that are there? What do you think?
I did not know Andy was going to do that. I've supported that for a long time. We introduced that in June of 1990 on the Republican side. It did not get a hearing. It's an excellent proposal. The MediSave accounts essentially are, if the average cost for insurance for a family of four in America today is about $4,500 to $4,800. That's about $400 a month. Either your company pays or you pay. If you bought a $3,000 deductible policy with $1 million umbrella, the $1 million umbrella would cost you about $1,500. The $3,000 deductible, the other $3,000 you take and put into a health bank, an IRA type account. So the first $3,000 worth of expenses every year are paid for, but with a debit card. 90% of us never use more than $3,000 worth of health care in a year in our lives, and one per year. So you would eliminate 90% of the paperwork insurance companies have in writing those checks. People would have changed the dynamics. People would, if you allowed those accounts to build, allowed them to be willed to heirs, allowed them to be transferred to your own account for retirement, all of a sudden every single health care purchase you make, you would think it's coming out of your pocket, not someone else is paying for it. And it changes the dynamics tremendously. People all of a sudden shop for value, ask for the cost, check doctors out. It puts competition in the marketplace. I think that's the way to go. After we have health care legal reform, some kind of tort reform, eliminate risk-free lawsuits so that anyone who sues has got some risk at stake. It wouldn't hurt health care at all. It would help every other business in America. But that is not going to come from the drafting boards of a team of attorneys. Ed, you had one more question?
That discretionary fund that you were talking about, is that actually money that's set aside, or is it just a credit that they've got there?
They're appropriate.
Invest that money?
I don't know what he does with it. It's at his disposal. My understanding is it's cash in an account. I know of one of the Democrat leaders went to him and said, I want to redo my office. It's going to cost about $500,000. And Tip said, we'll just pay for it out of that account. There's just so many shenanigans going on there. It's just corrupt.
Why can't we bring attention to those?
We did last year, but in fact, when it went on the floor of the House, the Gang of Seven, when they found it, raised all kinds of hell, passed a resolution changing it this year. The media wasn't interested. Wasn't interested. I want to thank you for coming. When I was first elected to the Georgia, or sworn into the Georgia House in January of 1975, I wanted to change the world. Now I'd just like to leave the room with a little dignity, and this seems like a nice time to try and do that.